Hi everyone, it's Kathy. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I'll be creating a slimline holiday card and I'll be using the Magical Winter stamp set along with the Bookmark and Tag Die Set and the Snow Flurry stamp set as well. I started out by cutting a white bookmark using the largest die from the Bookmark and Tag Die Set, and then I cut a snowy bank freehand from some masking paper. And I laid that down on top of my bookmark and did very light ink blending with Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide ink. I wanted to have the illusion that there were snowy banks going all the way up the bookmark. I know it's really very light and hard to see on camera, but once all is said and done, you'll be able to see those hills really well. After I was done with that, I used the mask to cover up the very top hill that I had done, and I had also die cut a circle mask using a round die. I did some ink blending with some chipped sapphire distress oxide ink up at the very top, and then I moved on to peacock feathers and I blended that down a little bit further, and then I left a little bit of white above my mask and came in with tumbled glass distress oxide ink. I did do the ink blending twice just to make sure that I got a really nice blend. After I was done ink blending the sky, I removed the mask and I had created a homemade stencil by using the same size circle die and cutting a piece of acetate. I started to do some ink blending with scattered straw, but I didn't think that that was quite bright enough, so I decided to go over that with squeezed lemonade distressed oxide ink. Next, it was time to add some trees to my background, and for that I used black soot distress oxide ink. And I used the small trees up along the very top edge of my snowy banks, and then I used the larger trees, and after I did the first row I got a little bit stuck because I wanted to have more trees fill in that background, but I didn't want the trees to overlap so much that they just kind of blurred together. So what I did was I did second generation stamping, where I would ink up my stamp really well, and then I would stamp off first on a piece of scratch paper and then stamp directly onto my little bookmark. After I was done stamping in the trees, I stamped the silhouette of Santa and the reindeer right on top of the moon, and for that I used VersaFine Onyx Black ink just because it's a darker ink and it sits on top of the Distress Oxide inks just a little bit better. I wanted to have some very fine splatter, so I used a white ink spray and poured a little bit on my mat, and then I used a very sophisticated tool called a crafting toothbrush, and I dipped the bristles in and used my thumbnail and held it pretty close to the bookmark to make sure that I got it close enough, but also I had more control over how fine that splatter was. Now, if you don't want to use a craft toothbrush, you can use any type of paintbrush that has very stiff bristles. That would work as well. For the coloring, I'm only going to share how I colored in the snowman body, his hat, his scarf, and his mittens. Because he's a snowman and this is a nighttime scene, I wanted the shadows on the snowman to have a cold feel to them. So to do the shading on that little guy, I started out with V20 and I added that in the areas where the shadows would be the deepest. After the V20, I added a little bit of B60 right on top of the V20, but I didn't go out as far with the B60 as I did with the V20. And then to get a really good blend between the V20 and the B60, I came in with C0 and went over all of it, and I pulled that color out a little bit further, and at first it kind of appears that my snowman is gray, but by the time all is said and done, he will look white in the end. Now for the white part on his hat and the little pom-pom on his hat, I wanted those to have shadows as well, but I didn't want them to be the exact same shadow colors as I used on the snowman body. So for that, I started with N3 and I added that in the areas where it would be the darkest. So at the very bottom of the rim of his hat and more on his pom-pom. I blended that out with N2 and then blended that out with N0. For his hat and his scarf, I'm going to share with you a little trick that I used to cheat a little bit to get some really good deep dark shadows. I started out with R29 and I added that in the areas where it would be the darkest on his hat, his scarf, and his mittens. So for his mittens, it would be more along the bottom, and the piece of the scarf that's further behind him would be a little bit darker than the piece that's in front of him. And then for his hat, it's the very top front that's going to have the highlight. So I concentrated the darkest area at the very bottom by the pom-pom and then along the bottom of the rim. After the R29, I came in with R27, and you'll see that I colored the part of the scarf that's in front. I colored that in more with the R27 with very little R29. The third red that I brought in was R24, and I filled in all of the white spaces that I left on his hat and his scarf. And this is how I cheat a little bit to get really dark shadows. I come in with my darkest dark color, in this case it's R59, and I'll add it very, very sparingly in the areas where it would be really very dark. So where his hat is kind of bent over and then at the very bottom above the pom-pom. And then to get some separation from those two pieces of his scarf, I'll add it on the piece that's a little bit further back, and then where the scarf is tied up at the top of his neck, and for the very bottom of his mittens. Then I'll come back in with my mid-tone, which was R27, and blend over the R59, and then I'll do another quick blend over that with the R24. So that's how I color snowmen to give that cool feeling, and then to differentiate the shadows between the snowman and the white part on his hat, I'll use neutral grays. And then for my darkest dark shadows, I'll cheat and come in with my darkest color at the very last bit of my coloring. So moving right along, after I had the coloring done, I did cut a piece of blue cardstock down to 8 by 3. And then I did some tone-on-tone stamping with the snowflakes from the Snow Flurries stamp set. I set that piece aside, and then I adhered a piece of red cardstock that measures 8 1/4 by 3 1/4 to my card front. My card front started out at 8 1/2 by 7. I scored it at 3 1/2 inches on the 7-inch side, so my finished card size is 3 1/2 by 8 1/2. I did use a corner rounder to round the corners on my card base, the red cardstock, the blue cardstock, and the bottom of my bookmark as well. I did put some foam tape on the back of my bookmark and adhered that to the front of my card. And then I put some foam tape on the back of my snowman and added him to the front of the bookmark. And to finish it up, I used my white Blizzard Nouveau drops to add some snow on those snowy hills, and then I couldn't resist and I had to add a little bit of shimmer to the snowman's hat, so I used my Wink of Stella glitter pen for that. And that finishes up my card for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, we'd love it if you would, and don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.